All right. What? Okay. Well, welcome to the November 15th Planning Commission. And so, Jackie, you want to do call the order?
Commissioner Hobb.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Strauss.
Here.
Commissioner Mattel.
Here.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Navarro.
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Here.
Commissioner Bennett.
Here.
Commissioner Berube. Here. Chair Olson.
Here. Thank you, Jackie. The next item on the agenda is approval of the meeting agenda. Is there any edits or additions or comments to the agenda? Or motion? The agenda? Yeah.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Now we have the approval of the minutes from October 25th, 2017. Did anybody have any comments? Edits? The minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Great. So we have one public hearing tonight, and it's a subdivision with variances on 6017 Walnut Drive. And Carrie will present. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Planning Commission. Oops. Sorry about that. Before you, we do have a subdivision with a couple of variances. The property is located out on the west side of town on Vernon and Walnut, so it's just east of 169. Oh, it's difficult to see on this graphic. Property is located right here. You see there's some apartments to the west, some high-density residential toward the freeway. Here's a look at the existing property. It was originally platted as 2 lots, so it's oversized given the existing lots around it. The original home was built on the north lot, and the south lot remains vacant. Here's a look at the original plat from 1953. It is lots 1 and 2. So these are the 2 lots that we're looking at. The existing home is located on lot 2. So this request requires a subdivision, lot width variances from 96 feet to 89 and 88 feet, and lot area variances from that 12,611 square feet to just under that. As the Commission is aware that any lots in areas that are over 9,000 square feet, the minimum lot size is established by all of the homes within 500 feet of the property. It's the median lot area, width, and depth. So that calculation was run, and the medians in this area are the 96.6 feet for width and the 12,611 square feet for area. It does meet the depth requirement. Our zoning requirements changed from the time that this area was platted. Our codes at that time, the minimum lot size was 9,000 square feet and 75 feet in width. So it was a code compliant plat originally. So primary issue, are the findings for a variance met? In this case, staff believes that it is. Practical difficulty is the existing plat was originally combined by a previous property owner and combined. So for whatever reason, they wanted to have that vacant lot to the south. We believe the request is reasonable given the context of the neighborhood. The 2 resulting lots would be similar to the existing lots on Walnut Drive. The existing home would remain, and you can see proposed new dwelling would go on the south lot. In general, the grading would be graded such that The drainage would generally run to Vernon Avenue and to Walnut. Again, a detailed plan would be reviewed at the time of a building permit. I've used it, although the graphic has changed a little bit, we take a look at similar requests that we've made through the years, a little over 10 years. We've had a number of subdivisions like this. Most of them have been on the east side of town around Pamela Park. You may recall earlier this year we had a 2-lot subdivision on Ewing. This graphic didn't turn out very well, I apologize for that. But it's this property right here. France Avenue is just to the west. That lot is similar in that the lots in that area, the medians were over the 9,000 square feet. It was about an 11,000 square foot home. And the lot widths were in the 80-foot range. So variances were needed. The two resulting lots were slightly less. So somewhat similar to the request this evening. I did recall after the staff report went out last week, another subdivision that the city approved on this west side of town on Tracy Avenue. Just south of, so here's Vernon and Tracy. And again, the graphic seems to be very light, but there was an oversized property right here. It was about 25,000 square feet, so the resulting lots were in that 12,000 square foot range, similar to what's requested this evening. And this site, again, received the variance to divide into 2 lots, and there's 2 existing homes there today. So this one is at least on the west side of Highway 100, somewhat close to this subject property. So with that, staff is recommending approval, subject to the findings that are outlined in your staff report and the conditions as well. So with that, I can stand for any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Are there any questions for Commissioner?
Commissioner Teague, the setbacks would all be, I mean, the proposed house within its lot 1 meets all the setbacks that would be
Correct.
in place, right? And then any new dwelling.
Any new home would be required to meet those same setbacks.
So we're really just talking the overall dimension of lots 1 and 2. And
Correct.
Just being
Yep,
under.
it's the variance for lot width and lot area.
Okay. That public easement between the lots, was that existing? I mean, the easement, for sewer utility, or the utility easement between lot 1 and 2, was that? Did that exist even when it was a single?
Oops, let's see. So there's no easements out there today, and what's proposed would be, this would be a new drainage and utility easement that would be part of the plat that would ultimately be approved.
So that's something new that.
So that would be an improvement to existing conditions, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Carrie? Okay, great. Thank you, Carrie. Great. So is the applicant here? Would they like to speak? Okay. You don't have to, but yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Just state your name and address. Thanks.
We've owned this property for 26 years, and when we bought it, we were told we could sell the extra lot, so we were a little bit surprised to find out that we had to go through this procedure. The homes in Walnut Ridge Division where we are all single-family, one-story homes, and that would fit very well on Lot 1. Lot 2 is our house that we lived in, and that was a one-story tuck-under garage. And the reason I looked at that we didn't come in with the lot size for the 500 feet area was that from our house, it was you cross Vernon, you go into Viking Hills Edition, which are 2-story houses and have larger lots, and that kind of skewed the median size. So otherwise, our lots are pretty much all the same there in Walnut Ridge Edition.
Are there any questions for the applicant? Commissioner?
Yeah, in your In your application, you said that you've spoken to some of the neighbors and they're in favor of it. Were there any neighbors that were opposed?
No, there weren't. The neighbors were mostly concerned that there would be a McMansion built there that would block some of the views. Although one of the reasons we bought that property was because we realized we're on the top of the hill, and that's always nice to be on the high part. You don't have to worry about the floods and the water or anything.
Right.
And but in comments that I got, phone calls that I got 2 phone calls asking if a side-by-side double could be built on that lot. And I said, no, this is single-family residence in here. Now, as you go east on Vernon, there are quite a few double homes there. And as far as the neighbors we talked to, all of them, none of them opposed it.
Thanks.
Commissioner Nemroff, was that was a question? Okay. Commissioner Lee?
So you're making this request because you are about ready to sell the lot, is that right? You have an interested buyer?
Yes, we had a buyer this summer, but I don't know if they want to come back again. They were mostly concerned about that we first get the approval that the lot would be buildable, a lot 1. And they may come back and buy it, but at this point we don't know that for sure.
So if we approve the subdivision, then you will actually be owner of 2 properties, so you could potentially just sell your house property, still keep the other one, or sell the 2 together. You haven't quite decided, right?
No, we haven't. We'd either sell, I'd prefer to just keep it the way it is and have somebody buy it and keep it. That's like we said, we love the extra room, but somebody may want to do that. But the person that we had as a buyer this summer, he's a developer, and he wanted to take and remodel the home and then build another home on lot 1.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so this is a public hearing, and is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak? Back there? No? Okay. Motion to close?
Move to close the public hearing.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you. So I'll bring it back to the Planning Commission. Are there any other additional comments or questions? Yeah. We passed the line in Charlie. It's a free-for-all now. Commissioner Lee, thank you.
I thought the data was interesting to look at what the Planning Commission had decided in previous times, although in some ways I feel that there is really no bearing. Obviously every parcel is so different. This one I think makes it fulfills the requirements, if there were any, in my mind, because it is such a large, oversized parcel. I think in my mind it helps that it is bordered, it's a corner lot, so it's not affecting a neighbor on 2 sides or 3 sides as a landlocked parcel might be. The topography of the land is just as the owner stated, actually sits up on a high point, so when you look at drainage, the steepest part is down to Vernon. So I think the intent, if a house was built on that parcel, would make sure that their stormwater drainage would all go to the street, not impacting an adjacent neighbor. The home behind it actually has a pretty large backyard parcel that receives some water runoff from that their parcel, but again, I think that doesn't change the topography of the land. I think it's interesting that we've received a couple of these where I think there's been longtime owners, and they found the parcel to be their liking for, they may even be original owners. So the additional lot or that yard was what works well for them, and they chose to live it that way. But as they've continued to live there, and if there's a time to begin to consider selling a property, it is obviously within their full I'd say their rights to kind of look at a lot split, and it makes it particularly easy to know that it was platted as 2 lots to begin with, and this was really the result of the original owner electing to buy the 2 lots and treat it as one. So in my mind, I think that the facts show that this is probably an easy approval.
Yeah, I would agree with Commissioner Lee, and I just think that also in terms of the variance, it's a relatively small percentage. It's like 3 to 8% difference in terms of square footage, so it really is pretty nominal. So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I echo those comments. I want to thank the applicant too for the distinction of the neighborhood, just the size of lots and homes being different and why that 500 feet doesn't really apply. That was a useful fact. And yeah.
Agreed. I agree with all the comments that have been made, so I won't repeat them. But yeah, the fact that it started out with 2 lots and, you know, it's not that large of a variance, so. Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
I recommend that the City Council approve the proposed 2-lot subdivision of 6017 Walnut Drive and the lot width variances from 96.6 feet to 88 and 89 feet, and lot area variances from 12,611 square feet to 12,170 and 11,643 square feet for each lot. Approval is based on the staff's findings and subject to the staff's conditions.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Or any discussion?
Aye.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Aye. I know, I skipped the discussion again.
Good. Thank you.
This will go to the City Council on December 5th.
December 5th. Thank you so much. All right, so the next item is to review the draft 2018 Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan.
Why do subdivisions like this go to the city council? Is there a way that or is there a history of why that's important?
Yeah, well, that's the way the city code is written, that the City Council has to hold a public hearing on all subdivisions.
I know, but
So
that's the way.
some cities do allow their planning commissions to take final action on, well, we take final action on variances. Other cities that I'm aware of, allow planning commissions to take final action on site plan reviews. Some do subdivisions as well. It would take an ordinance change to do that, but that's something that we could consider.
I was just curious if they were agreeable to just see, and I don't know how often it comes in like this, but I mean,
Yeah, it really varies, as most of you are aware. You know,
Yeah.
we've had some that where sometimes they don't always fit the character of the neighborhood like this one did, where there's a variety of larger lots and smaller lots on a block. Those are the ones that have been denied.
maybe before the next meeting, could you look into the history of the planning commission's votes and the council in subdivisions, and just out of curiosity of when they conflict, if they have ever?
Yep, I can sure do that. I can't think of off the top of my head when they have conflicted. I think you've been pretty much on the same page on these kind of subdivisions, but I can verify that.
Thanks.
All right, go for it.
Director of Engineering. We're here tonight to get some feedback on our Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan. So this is required as part of the comprehensive plan that you guys are well involved in. We're looking for some comments to guide our policies and the implementation activities that are within that document. There was some questions today from a commissioner, and one of the responses was that no negative impacts to property, roads, utilities, wetlands, storms, or streams, etc. That'd be a great goal if we could achieve it, but sometimes we need to make trade-offs. Sometimes we want negative impacts to roads to protect property. So ideally, that would be the case. You're going to hear tonight that sometimes it just isn't the case. In most cases, we hope, but we'll hear some of our strategies we have in place, policies we're working on. We'd love to get your feedback when we get through the presentation. So Jessica Wilson is our Water Resources Coordinator. She's kind of heading up this effort, and she'll present that information right now.
Hello, Chair, Commissioners. Thank you for having us here to share our draft Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan. I'll introduce you kind of a little bit to what the plan is all about and then some major elements. And I think what you'll see is a really honest look at water resources management in Edina and a lot more transparency. We're moving towards transparency also. So kind of to set the stage of what this plan is all about, in the local comprehensive plan, there are several chapters, one of those chapters being the Water Resources chapter. The Water Resources chapter is fed information from the Water Supply Plan, the Wastewater Plan, and the Local Water Plan, which is actually what I'm presenting tonight, although we call it the Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan. So we have the word comprehensive in both, and so to kind of clarify, there's the Local Comprehensive Plan, and then I'll call this our Local Water Plan, meaning Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan, just to keep it straight. And then I just want to clarify too, as I go through the presentation, I'll talk about this clean water and our clean water strategy. And when I talk about clean water, I'm talking about lakes and streams and ponds and wetlands, surface water, not drinking water. That's covered under a different plan, the Water Supply Plan. So we're going to separate that. As I talk about clean water, think surface water, recreational waters, those kinds of things. So our overarching goal is to promote public health, safety, general welfare by minimizing losses and disruptions. And we're always working towards building resiliency and vibrancy in the community. And we have some kind of more pointed goals that I'll point out along the way. So just to give you an outline of where I'm going to go, a little bit of background information, set the stage, and then there's some key issues, policy gaps, questions related to flooding, clean water, and then runoff management and drainage. And then I'm seeking some feedback from this group. Throughout the slides, you'll see some questions peppered in, and I'm going to ask you to hold all of those responses and questions until the very end. Partly added them in just to kind of give you a sense of what staff are curious about and wondering about and struggling with. So those questions peppered in are kind of to ponder, and then I'll invite you to provide some responses at the very end. This is our anticipated schedule. We're here in November. Public comment period is open. It's not required by statute, but we wanted to get a sense for what the public thought about our draft plan. And then in front of Planning Commission, we'll get your feedback tonight. We're bringing this to City Council work session next week. And then after we review the comments that we receive from the public, we've put out informal comment requests to watershed districts in neighboring cities. And then we've visited with Energy and Environment Commission, and then tonight with you at Planning Commission. After we incorporate any other comments and consider other comments, we'll come back to City Council in December and ask them to approve submission of this plan for stakeholder review. It's got to be reviewed by the watershed districts in our city, so that's 9 Mile Creek Watershed District and Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. And then we anticipate by the end of the first quarter of 2018 that we can adopt our local water plan, which has to be done before the local comprehensive plan, and elements of our local water plan will kind of bubble up to Chapter 8 of the local comprehensive plan. So why update this plan? We have much better data today than in our current 2011 plan. There's new contour data, which is much more refined, and then new precipitation frequency data. You've heard the term Atlas 14, and what Atlas 14 showed is that it's a much more recent data set, and it shows that precipitation frequency, at least in our region, has increased. So in a 24-hour storm event, 100-year storm event, instead of seeing 6 inches of rainfall, we see actually 7.5. So we're expecting more water with this updated precipitation frequency that feeds our hydraulic and hydrologic model. This is an opportunity to review cost, services, and risk. Stormwater management paradigm has shifted over time. It's a way to reset the path between policies and our implementation efforts, increase community capacity by inviting the public to participate in solving some of these problems. Sets a strategy for creating local clean water goals and a plan to accomplish them in a meaningful way. And it acknowledges a lot of conflicting services and trade-offs to better integrate water resources with the other city services that we provide. So again, it's a very honest look at our current status and the progress that we're making, and some strategies to make some incremental improvements over time. So the plan purpose, specifically, this plan guides the services provided by the stormwater utility. So flood protection, clean water, and again, that's surface water, and then runoff management and drainage. So in the plan, there's a brief executive summary, some intro physical setting stuff that hasn't really changed since the 2011 plan. Some big changes were made to the policies section, that's section number 3. So I'd be curious to get some feedback from you on that. And then methodology for modeling and results by major drainage area, that's the really data-heavy model section, or several sections. And then another area where a lot of significant changes were made is in that issues and implementation program section, which is section, I think it's 15. It changed a little bit as we were drafting around. And then wetlands, and then references and dependencies. So again, policies changed a lot since the current plan. Issues and implementation changed a lot. And also, our modeling is quite a bit different too, just because we have such better data now. So I'm going to set the stage for where we're at today. If we look at the demand for services and understanding of the problem that we have, if we look on a scale from low demand to high demand, drainage services have a really high demand. Clean water, less so. Flooding, even less so for those services. And recognizing that it changes a little bit depending on where you live. If you live right next to a water body, or if you experience some damages during a recent flood, that might be a little bit different for you. But overall, we see the demand for drainage services in the city much higher than the demand for clean water and flooding services. As far as the resources that we allocate to those services, this is capital investments citywide from a public and private perspective, from low to high. Drainage, again, really high. People are willing to spend money on drainage to solve their own drainage problems on private property even, and there's a high demand for it, drives that public capital investment as well. Flooding and clean water, less so. I also want to just point out too, our current storm utility funds often support things like sump line installations, curb, gutter. All of those things are drainage services. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. The more we spend in that utility on things like drainage, the less it's available for those other services that we provide. So I'm going to go into this really complex problem. We could call it complexity, we could call it a social mess, we could call it a wicked problem. And what that means is that it's a social or cultural problem, difficult or impossible to solve. And it's often due to these factors: incomplete, contradictory knowledge, the number of people and opinions involved, large economic burden, interconnected nature of these problems with other problems make them really challenging problems to solve. And they have many characteristics, wicked problems do, and solutions aren't going to be right or wrong, but better or worse. And so this graphic says, no single drop of water thinks it is responsible for the flood. So any solutions that we propose won't necessarily solve problems completely, but we can promote incremental changes over time that get us closer to the goal. We can make things better, or we could make things worse, depending on the policies and strategies we implement. Not necessarily right or wrong, but better or worse. So I'm going to start off with flooding and runoff management. And with this plan, we have improved understanding of flooding, and that's in large part due to our new model, which is informed by the best available data right now. With this new model, the extent and number of flooding issues has increased. We have more than double the amount identified in our draft plan than in our current plan. And I'll take you on a tour, a virtual tour of these inundation areas a little bit later on in the presentation to show you where those are. But overall, flooding issues have increased, not what you want to see 10 years later after you have a plan to identify and address issues. In this plan, we have improved transparency so that we can better communicate issues and inform decisions for the public, city staff, decision makers. We decided it was a really easy decision for us to publish these inundation maps. And you can imagine publishing maps that show where flooding is citywide could be sensitive for some folks. And our consultant even asked us, are you sure you want to publish these maps? And we thought, of course we do. We want the public to really understand what their actual risk is so they can make informed decisions on their property. We want city staff, not just in engineering, but throughout the city, to really understand these flooding issues because there are projects that are happening citywide, and we want them to have a sense for where these issues are so that we can take advantage of opportunities to make things incrementally better, or if we ignore them, incrementally worse. And we want also, when city staff reviews capital projects like street reconstructions, for example, to not just look at this narrow street that they're rebuilding, but to look at the neighborhood and see if there's problems that can be made incrementally better with some strategies. And then lastly, for decision makers, we want commissions and city council to really understand the risk and the issues and strategies that we can use to make things incrementally better so that we can be really strategic and future thinking as we move through this generation of the plan. So the progress based on our current plan, our 2011 plan, approximately 10% of the issues were solved. A lot more were evaluated, but many were determined to be infeasible. So staff is asking kind of themselves, what's the right pace of implementation? And I think we need some direction from city council on that. Is this a 10-year plan? Is this a 50-year plan? Is this a 100-year plan, or is this a never plan? So a couple things I want to share with you about our flooding modeling. We know with the Atlas 14 data that precipitation frequency is increasing. And if you look at this year-to-date precipitation, so this is just 2017, and the blue spikes that are vertical show specific rain events in inches. The green line shows the normal precipitation for a typical year, and then the red jagged line shows what's actually accumulated in this specific year in 2017. And so you can see, especially in this later part of the year, that we have more precipitation than in a normal year. And this isn't unique to just 2017. If we look at the last several years, you can see that there's more precipitation than in a normal year. So what these figures show, this is 3 separate years, so 2016 on the left, and then 2015 in the middle, 2014 on the right. And this is the departure from normal. So as you get into blue, and then dark purple, and then lighter purple, that's more rain than you would see in a typical year. And if you look at Hennepin County, we see a lot of blue and purple. So showing that over the last several years, this is the 4th year in a row where we're seeing more precipitation than in a typical year. So what we often hear in the engineering department related to water is, I've never seen this before, and we're saying that it's probably right because we've seen a lot more rain in the last several years. So in addition to more precipitation and the effects of climate change, we also see this impervious trend that is increasing. So here are 3 properties on Kellogg Avenue, 2009. Those same 3 properties on Kellogg Avenue in 2015. What do you notice in those pictures? The structures are getting bigger. They're going from single driveways, single car driveways to double car driveways. They might be adding patios. Overall, impervious cover is increasing, and we currently don't have a limit on impervious cover. There's some hard cover limits, and then there's a lot of exceptions, but there's really no hard limit on impervious cover. So in a lot of ways, residential impervious trend is increasing with no limit, and it's causing us to go backwards in our flood protection efforts. What's typical in these situations is our code essentially says you can't harm your neighbor and you can't cause damage to the public system. How do you do both of those things all the time, everywhere? You can't. So what happens a lot of times with these redevelopments is you can't do any harm to your neighbor, so water is directed to the street, to the public system, which may or may not already be at capacity. So who owns the risk? Another thing that staff is kind of pondering. Do we manage on site? Do we route to a public system? Do we have space in that public system? So I'm going to take just a second to kind of bring this sidebar in and describe the difference between flooding and runoff management and drainage, two separate things. And what you see in the images here, these are drainage issues. So on the right, there's a little bit of street flooding. In the middle and on the left side, you see some maybe backyard ponding, maybe it's impacting some trees, some other accessory structures like pergolas, things like that, but really not primary structures. So here's kind of this model neighborhood, this pretend neighborhood, and there's several streets, it's fully developed, every lot has a house on it, and then at the top of the image you see a pond, that is the lowest spot in the neighborhood. And what we see in a typical scenario in this kind of model neighborhood is over time, impervious cover increases, sanitary sewer infiltration is reduced as we go through and rebuild streets and fulfill that legal obligation to protect the sanitary sewer. Drainage paths are either sediment in or they're obstructed. Someone wants to set up a shed in the backyard in this low area, or it's a little bit soggy, so they're going to build a berm and make a garden out of it. Sump flows are added as basements are built really, really deep, and then sump lines keep those basements dry. Drainage issues develop over time. So you can see there's a couple wet areas around, there's some street flooding, there's some backyard flooding, and then there's some park flooding. These typically don't impact principal structures or evacuation routes. So the next thing that happens is we get some requests, we being the city in general, there's flooding on my street, there's flooding in my backyard, solve this problem for me, build something to resolve this issue for me. So we can do that, we can engineer that, we can put in some pipes to drain those areas to the low pond in the neighborhood. And in some cases, we can solve some of those drainage issues or a series of drainage issues and create or exacerbate a flooding problem. That water doesn't disappear, we're just moving it around from one place to another. And so in this image you can see then that pond in the low area at the top of the picture gets a little bit bigger, there's more water there. So we're kind of wondering, which competing service is primary, drainage or flood protection? What's the right level of service that we're going to provide? What are we willing to protect? What's the right level, what level of risk is acceptable? So if this scenario continues, we still have a little bit of backyard flooding areas, we still have some park flooding areas, and we get requests, hey, you did it for that neighborhood, do it for mine. Or I went to the park after it rained, 2 hours after it rained, and the path had water on it. I want to be able to walk in my park after it rains, do something about that. We can engineer that solution, we can build some pipes, we can drain that water to the low area, and again, we can create or exacerbate existing flood problems in some unexpected ways. And so this, you see that big pond now is impacting some parcels, some structures that might experience flooding, and some water has backed up through that pipe and recreated that street flooding problem. So again, which competing service is primary? What's the right level of service? What's the right level of protection? What level of risk is acceptable? And that's what we're looking for guidance from Commission, City Council, as we set policies and implementation. I want to introduce you to another concept that we are struggling with as far as how to craft policies to be protective of private property and water resources. So here's another neighborhood. This water body, this is a landlocked basin. And so that means there's no outlet. The only way for water to leave is to evaporate or seep down into the ground. There could be some artificial pumping to manage water level. Some common landlocked basins that you might be familiar with in the city: Arrowhead Lake, Indian Head Lake, Cooper Pond. And in this neighborhood, there's several homeowners, and this is the condition that had persisted for many, many years. But there was a drought, or artificially some pumping was occurring, and that water level went down quite a bit. Over time, homeowners think, that's not a very pretty site down by the water. I'm going to add a garden and really beautify my space. So they add a garden down by the water. On another lot, some volunteer trees come in. These are trees that you don't necessarily even have to plant. They just grow in spaces where you don't mow. So things like silver maples are voluntary trees, and they might start growing close to the water. And then you have this homeowner on the bottom right side. He just moved in 2 years ago. He's never seen the water higher than what it is today. He builds a shed down in this low area that's a little less usable on his lot. Then we get rainfall events and impervious trends like we've been experiencing in the last 5 to 10 years, and water goes back up to where it probably had been in the past. And now the gardens are flooded, voluntary trees are dying and falling into the water, sheds and other accessory structures are impacted. So what are we protecting? What are we trying to protect? What's the right level of service? So before I go too far and then start to introduce you, I want to take you on a tour of the city of Edina at a snapshot in time where we see a 1% annual chance flood event. But a couple things I want to define for you first. We have regional flood issues. These are areas defined by FEMA. They're typically longer duration, so that water can persist there for days or weeks at a time. And we have some floodplain ordinance in Chapter 36 that establishes local controls. Those are relatively easy to implement because they're very clear. The kinks have been worked out over decades, and those are relatively easy to implement. Then we have local flood issues, and these are areas that are defined by our local hydrologic and hydraulic model that I'll show you the results of here in just a little bit. So these are typically shorter in duration. They could last on the order of hours. And we have policies in our comp water plan, our local water plan, that guide engineering standards. However, these are not in city code. There's potential to codify them. But there's some trade-offs that we make there too, and I'll show you a couple lots where if we were to codify local flood issues with the same standards as FEMA flood issues, that would make it really, really challenging to develop those properties. So we can categorize these issues in a number of ways. We looked citywide at all the flood areas that we had, and there were a lot. So we had to narrow that list down, and we looked at the number of structures affected, emergency routes, achievability, opportunity. More than 80 areas were identified, but we described fewer than that in our plan because we had to cut it off somewhere. There were just so many. There are more issues identified in our draft plan than in our current plan, largely due to that change in climate and imperviousness. So are we moving in the right direction? How do we creatively solve these problems? How do we plan for resiliency? Overall, if we're going to summarize our approaches, we have this more conventional approach, which is an infrastructure improvement strategy. We're going to build it bigger. We're going to put in some pipe. This is the built option. We can do that either with reconstruction projects already happening or standalone. We can operate and maintain our existing infrastructure. Another strategy we could use is this redevelopment strategy, more opportunistic as properties come up for development, either residential or commercial. We can have some standards that encourage them to reduce their own risk. There's some potential for shifts in neighborhood character here as homes elevate out of floodplain areas. And then also just promoting resiliency, flood risk information informs actions and investment for private property owners. So we have a flood risk reduction strategy, and that's outlined in that executive summary handout. And in there, there's a few things that we're going to seek specific input from commissions and council on. One of those being street storage. Is it acceptable to use the street to store flood water temporarily? That's a question for commissions and councils. How are elevating structures going to be evaluated by commissions and councils? Is that acceptable or not acceptable? Is voluntary acquisition of at-risk properties something that there's an appetite for at the decision maker level? So I'm going to take it a tour now, and Chad's going to help me out. He's going to drive. Oh, yeah. And this is all on our interactive water resources map. So on our website, if you go to maps, water resources, all this information is available. So a couple key areas that I'll just point out that staff noted right away. The first one would be Weber Pond. So Weber Pond is this constructed stormwater pond. We know that it's undersized when it was first built. And it's a flood area. It actually also is a FEMA floodplain area. But then when we overlay our local model, we see a lot of other smaller areas that are also impacted. So this one really stood out to us. This is a really complex problem. This is going to be a difficult one to solve. The next one is Halifax in this country club area. And that one, I think, oh, is it? Yeah. Yep, there we go. And that one, Halifax, was also surprising. We were recently there with a street reconstruction project before we had the information that we do now. So that one also stood out as a big problem, that there might not be another opportunity to address it with a capital conventional engineering approach for quite a while. Oh, yes. So what you see in yellow is the 1% annual chance storm. It's also called the 100-year event. And we've started calling it the 1% annual chance event because there's a misconception that if it's a 100-year event, if it happens, you're safe for 99 years. And that's not the case. It's a probability. So every year there's a 1% chance of that event happening. So this is at the peak of that storm. What would be underwater is shown in yellow. And in a 30-year mortgage term, the odds of having a 1% annual chance event occur is 24%. So it's not something that's likely to never happen. Every year, 1% chance in a 30-year term, there's a good likelihood that you could be impacted. So this next one is the Southdale neighborhood. And this one has many structures impacted with several feet of water. So these basements fill up in a 1% annual chance, and perhaps even smaller, but we're only showing the 1% annual chance flood here. Yeah, and structures are residential in that particular area, which is different than this next one we'll show you, which is the Pentagon Park Fred Richards area, where the structures that are impacted are primarily commercial structures. And there's a little bit of Bloomington there too that's impacted, but you can see the former golf course there, Fred Richards Park, a lot of inundation, and then a lot of those commercial areas are inundated as well, in addition to street flooding. And so then we have to take a close look at evacuation routes and emergency service providers. And we've asked our emergency services, what does it take to get through areas like this so that we can be protective of the community? A couple, do you have something to add?
I was just going to say, this one really shows how, notice where the buildings are? There's no flooding at the building. So they knew what was going on here, and they made a choice to flood the parking lots over the buildings. You can see how it directly goes around those buildings. But if there's any future development there, then we got to consider the entire area and consider this map as we go forward.
And then just a couple others that we want to point out to you. This one is, again, on kind of the north side of the city, and this is at 44th Street in Grimes. And this one, there's some properties that are kind of looking at potential for remodels or additions or new structures. And then we see a flood shape like this, where the lot where the Chad has the cursor there is almost entirely covered with this local floodplain area. So if we were going to apply a standard there that said that you had to elevate your structure, that makes that a really challenging site to build on. So the question is, should we codify some of those standards for elevating? If we do, there's going to be some lots that are really challenged by that code requirement. So that's another kind of that we're struggling with. Next, Highlands Park. This is another park property. Typically in cities, what becomes a park is a space that's not great for building. It's either got some infrastructure or is a low area that floods and they become parks. So Highland Park, we see a lot of flooding in that 100-year event. Trails are flooded. Adjacent private properties are concerned about encroaching flood shapes as well. Biscayne Boulevard, this one was heard earlier this fall by City Council. There was some concern over street flooding on Biscayne Boulevard and a request to do something to manage street flooding in that space. Okay, yep. So then we have to make some considerations. If we solve that street flooding problem, what are the downstream effects? Is that, what level of service are we providing? And then Indian Head Lake is another one that's come up recently. It's a landlocked basin. There's been a lot of water this year. When does the city get involved with pumping? When should that be kind of managed by the neighbors around that water body? We're seeking direction, staff is seeking direction on that as well. So those are the main areas. I invite you to take a look at this map after this or at your leisure, and we're gonna be open for public comment until November 27th, so even after that city council work session, there's still time to provide some comments. So I have a few other things I wanna introduce you to, and then I'll seek your feedback. Yeah, so the map is on our City of Edina website. If you just search maps or water resources, it'll get you there. So that's kind of flooding and drainage. I'm gonna move on quickly to clean water, and I'll get you guys through here so that there's time for comments. So for the clean water portion of the plan, the current strategy in the plan was to meet minimum standards. It was essentially to check boxes for the federal minimum, well, I should say the state minimum standard. So we have a real clear, lack of a clear path for solving problems, and that's related to understanding the problem, policy gaps, and prioritizing, not only of clean water problems amongst other clean water problems, but also in the context of all of our water resources problems, which includes flooding and drainage as well. The current strategy in the 2011 plan was this narrow, dig it bigger, dig it deeper approach. How do we expand ponds to provide clean water? There's a lot more strategies we can promote than just that narrow one. And then our current plan also assumes that wetlands, lakes, ponds are used to treat stormwater for creeks, and we know that that doesn't align with local expectations for water bodies. So we don't have all our issues identified yet. We need a strategy for doing that, and this plan lays out a framework for establishing a policy. So the clean water services that I think the public and staff as well strive for would be aquatic recreation, habitat, life, ecosystem services, public health, and then drinking water source protection. There are several stressors to those things. Excessive nutrients and eutrophication, so algae growth, harmful algae blooms, low dissolved oxygen, chloride, and land use. And so we know that locally, expectations for water bodies for these clean water services are there, but our current strategy, does it actually help us get there? We're not sure. So what we're proposing with this plan is implementation item to develop a clean water strategy. So we don't have a clean water strategy for you today. We were kind of stuck in this catch-22 where we, as staff, were charged with developing an implementation table. And we said, okay, what's the goal? What's the pace? What's the budget that we're going to set aside for this? We need direction from council on all those things before we can start to schedule implementation activities. And council needs a lot more detailed information before they can tell us what the goal is, how fast we're going to move, where we're going to make those investments. So this is a way to lay out a framework to do that, to provide enough information for council to really set out what our goals are, because right now we don't know. We have a federal minimum and state minimum standards that set our goals, but locally we know that that doesn't really align with expectations. So this clean water approach is much more dynamic than in our current plan. It creates a path to define allocation of resources, the pace, location, et cetera, for making progress on goals. And it sets a framework for going beyond just checking the boxes of the minimum standard required by law. We don't have unlimited money, so we have to have a way to kind of prioritize and make those trade-offs of where we're going to spend money and what services we're going to provide. So this is the very end. I'm trying to get through so I give you guys enough time to have some discussion. So some pointed questions that we have for commission and at the council level. So should the city codify regional flooding standards for local flooding issues? Consider that that might make some development on private residential properties really challenging. Should the city develop a plan for voluntary acquisition of at-risk properties. Is there an appetite for that type of thing? For that strategy? Should the city have an impervious lot coverage limit? Consider impacts to development. For nuisance and impounded waters, should the city provide pumping services for non-structural flooding issues for things like trees, gardens, sheds, accessory structures, essentially? And then there are some private drainage issues that can be solved, but they happen on private property. Should the city provide a technical assistance program that would assist in paying for engineering a solution, not for building it, but for engineering a solution for up to $4,000 per issue? Should that be a budget item? And then for clean water, what are the clean water concerns that you're hearing? And what's the perception of progress related to clean water? So if there are any questions, it's a big, complex thing. So we wanted to get through it to just kind of give you a sense. And then, so we're seeking your comments now. And if we could kind of even go through and just get each commissioner's comments, that'd be really helpful.
And we'll take comments after this too, because it was a lot of information.
It's a lot of stuff.
So.
Right, and were you hoping to get our answers to your questions tonight too, or?
Some general thoughts on those questions, just to give us some guidance, because we are going to council next week. We'd love to just have a, you know, if there's some real specific ones on those questions where, yes, we should do this, or no, just so we can feed that to the council next week as we get their comments. So.
Okay, cool. And maybe bring those.
We can start at the beginning
keep looking at those again. I'm going to ignore you, Jimmy.
It's stretching and raising my hand, so I'm really eager.
Go for it.
First, maybe I have a question for you. I have a few comments. You said that you did talk to the Energy and Environment Commission already?
Yep. On October 12th, we were in front of them. We haven't received their comments yet.
Okay, that's
They're
what
drafting them right now. They're kind of going back and forth.
So I was going to ask what theirs were, since they're probably more in tune to a lot of it. Maybe I'll go last because I have a bunch of things.
So I want to address your questions. I have a lot of other comments, but I just want to say two things about your questions. First of all, I would recommend sending those out in advance of the meeting with, like you sent out the executive summary. I would send, if there are key issues you want resolved, send those out in advance before the meeting. We could have been thinking, and you know, this was a great presentation. It gives a lot more context. Yeah. But
yeah, thanks for that comment. Yeah,
if I had known at the outset of the meeting, for example, this is where you wanted to go. The second thing is, on one question you asked, is it worth it to fund up to $4,000 for private issues? And that's a good question, and I guess I don't necessarily have a solution or a definitive response, but I would ask you, would you have a proposal for obtaining funding for that? Because if you said, oh, well, we could get funding by doing this, and that funding we could then turn and solve this problem, I think that changes the question.
So I'll clarify that one. So in Manager Neal's budget for next year, he had an item in there to $4,000 was his number to potentially address local drainage problems. So we said, well, we didn't want to solve, like pay for stuff on private property. The watershed already has grant programs. The water stewards do stuff. Let's try to hit where people have issues. Who knows how to hire an engineer, what engineer to hire to fix their problem, and if it's even fixable. So we thought, instead of actually paying for the implementation, let's look at having a engineering firm on retainer or whatever with the city to help address some of these for that $4,000 number. Work with engineering staff. We'll come up with a solution if it's possible. Maybe it's not possible and we do something else. And then they have a plan potentially in front of them that they can go for bids, work with their neighbors. Maybe it's a joint project that they all paid for. But at least you provide that service that we felt was missing. That's kind of confusing for people. Who do I hire? Who do I get to do that?
I think that's a great idea. I guess what I was thinking, though, is something other than general funds or tax funding. Like if there was an assessment on properties doing X, you could take that. That would form a kitty that could then be applied.
And this funding would come out of the Stormwater Utility Fund. So it'd be that utility monthly bill that everybody's paying for. At this point, that was what was proposed. So it's just that question that Jessica had in there. What's the services that should be paid out of the stormwater utility? And it says competing values.
Like the
impervious surface tax. So if a developer wants to have a more than X percent, they pay so much, and that goes into the kitty that pays the 4,000. Is that kind of what you're thinking? Like there's another source?
That'd be an example. That's
Like a
the
carbon
fund
tax,
piece.
but it's,
As
but,
opposed to a general, something that's a
Yeah.
general fund issue.
yeah. And, because I love your response to the 4,000. Because my question was, I was thinking, well, where does 4,000 come from? Like what, having no background in this, it's just, could be an arbitrary number. But your response that it isn't just granting the money, but granting the money where people probably have the weakest link and providing that service, that's great. So I interrupted you.
No.
But, so go ahead with
you
yours.
helped me.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So, sorry for interrupting.
Okay.
It was early in the presentation, it was a comment about a paradigm shift. Now, was this water management plan, was that part of the 2008 comp plan?
Yep,
Okay.
and
And then the 2011 was some update or okay. But that paradigm shift, just maybe help me, is the old paradigm bigger and deeper and that's what you're moving from, right? Like big holding areas and.
Right, yeah, and if you kind of look at the history of stormwater management, you know, in the 50s and 60s, it was get water away as fast as you can, put in lots of catch basins and pipes to get it down to lakes and ponds. In the 80s and 90s, it was ponds. And in Edina in particular, we don't have a lot of stormwater ponds because we don't have a lot of space for that. And so it was a lot of that kind of dig it bigger, dig it deeper. And so as we learn more about stormwater management and new strategies, things like water reuse and iron
Rain gardens.
stuff and rain gardens, there's a lot more opportunities and encouragement of infiltration on site, impervious limits. So there's just a lot more, a wider breadth of strategies that we can implement today than in kind of past renditions.
There certainly seem to be other players in this, right? I mean, obviously, your outlets are the creeks, you know, Minnehaha Creek, 9 Mile Creek.
Or the ground.
And you got a lot of contributors that are filling those facilities up. I mean, certainly the highway systems. How do they, why don't we talk to MnDOT and say, help us out with.
Well, the watersheds each have a model. They have a model for the creek, just like we have a model. And if you propose adding, let's say we wanted to take Pennigan Park and just shoot it out a pipe into 9 Mile Creek, we wouldn't get the permit to do it. Because they have the model that they're also trying to do the same thing we are, protect properties, not make it any worse than it is today, and try to balance all those risks between everybody that's involved.
And things like MnDOT would be a stakeholder in like a kind of a pollution control agency, big TMDL effort. So they're still a stakeholder. We just don't have any of those that are at that level in Edina yet, although they're coming.
And you can see MnDOT's doing different things too. Look at some of the recent projects where all of a sudden you're starting to see water management ponds within the exit ramps.
Yes.
You know, think of 494. Every one of those has water now in it. That's stormwater management to keep the drainage from going downstream.
That's great. And just one final thing. I was attending as an observer on a small area plan with a meeting with developers. And I'm assuming this is what they were referring to or talking about, rehabbing a business park, industrial park. And some of the apprehension was upcoming water management plans. Is this what they're talking about?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
It's such a big problem and it's so complex. I don't know if I can say anything that's really intelligent, but I do have some sort of a philosophy about it. And it seems like when you ran us through your slide that said there's problems here, 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 they were everywhere. And now we're talking about the $4,000. Those things are related, and it's the public-private answer. It isn't going to be a public answer, and it isn't going to be a private answer. But private's got to step up and say, it seems like to me, because the problem is everywhere. And it seems like what you're saying, that it's perfectly okay to put the pressure back on the homeowner and the property owner and say, you have a problem that you're causing us, that you need to fix. Because water is local. It isn't, I live on a hill. It's not a problem for me. Water problems are local, and you have to solve them locally. Your example of 494 and the water management, they solved it absolutely locally, and that's what every homeowner is going to have to participate in. So that's one side of it, and I don't have any problem with saying to people, your house floods, you need to fix it, and you need to fix it on your site, and if you don't come to us. It isn't the universe's problem, it's your problem, it seems. But one of the things in the mission that you didn't talk about on the very first slide, one of the delights of Minnesota is water. And we don't talk about delight. And I think delight is part of the solution. The delight, the education, the conservation, the habitat management, all those pieces go back into where does the water go and what do we do with it, instead of saying, oh my goodness, I have a problem, my basement's flooded. Well, that's the same water that you make a lake out of. It's the same water that a duck swims in. We need to solve this thing looking at it, and I'm sure you do, but I don't see it here. I'm confident that's the way you think, but if you want us to think about stopping the flooding in my basement, then the way I stop the flooding in my basement maybe is by working hard in conservation, in rain gardens, in wetland management, in things that make the community a better place. It isn't just a problem, it's also a solution that's wonderful. And it seems like it needs to say that in there somewhere. No?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for your comment.
Commissioner Hobbs.
Thanks. And I agree a lot with what you just said, John. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of responsibility. And I think that's where the city can also maybe help out a little bit. And I guess that was one question I had when I look at table 1.1 in your executive summary. It has some strategies like plan and preserve and reclaim flood storage and maintain increased green space and green infrastructure you guys talk about. So what do you imagine are how the mechanism that would happen, and what would be the sources of capital to do that?
Yeah, great question. And so what this plan does is it lays out these overall strategies. And right now we're checking in to say, are any of these strategies off the table? These are some general high-level things that we're considering. And then in our plan, we propose a flood risk reduction strategy. And that would be part of I think we can do it in 2018 with the CIP money that we've already have set aside to develop a plan for dealing with those issues. And so we can look at, let's say, for example, we haven't scoped it out yet, but for example, we know this is what's coming up in the next 5 years for street recons, for parks. Let's take a look at all these areas and see what's feasible. Where might we do some voluntary at-risk acquisitions? Where might we say street storage is okay here, we're going to leave it alone? Where might we say here's an area where there's no flooding but it's got really great soil for infiltration and we can solve a problem downstream by looking here? So that's a later strategy. This plan just lays out a framework for doing that strategy where we can get a lot more detailed for those things. So these are kind of high level, what's available for staff to look into.
There's two that we're hearing a lot about is the street flooding. My street should not flood. And we're saying, wouldn't you rather have your street flood than your basement? And that we should continue to use the street as a flooding mechanism. It's short term, it should be hours. And we're reviewing the routes with our fire and police folks so they know what street. They have streets already they avoid for years. 62 under France, they never drive under there in a big storm because they don't get so high. So we're just making sure that street flooding is a technique to protect properties. The other one is the strategy which we haven't done, but other communities have. Should we start developing a strategy to purchase these properties that are always flooding? Is that something that we should? And I don't know how that's funded. I don't, that's something we just want to get feedback if that should be. And then there's the list of all the other ones on this table we talked about. So
I think thinking about, in my mind, thinking about opportunities. Maybe there's some places where they're constantly at risk, and you should think about just kind of buying the problem away. But also thinking about regional facilities in terms of flood storage and where there are opportunities to buy land that can serve from a regional standpoint. You look at that map, there's a lot of stuff going on that perhaps there would be opportunities to do it in a way that involves also from a habitat standpoint. I mean, I also, because of maybe in part what I do, that thinking about how you could use some of the city funds to match some of the state funds that other communities have done in terms of creating habitat that also helps to mitigate flooding issues, and even working with landowners. I know when you look at the map, it was interesting to look at my backyard is one of the places that is the 1%. That's exactly the spot where I put in my own little rain garden because it was always wet. That was 20 years ago, and it works great. So I mean, even some things like that to help, you know, some of the residents figure out how to deal with some of their local issues. I mean, evapotranspiration does magical things over when it gets really, you know, rains in the summertime. So I guess certainly I'm encouraging an overall strategy that involves a lot of green infrastructure techniques, regional storage ideas in terms of, and even again, thinking of how we incorporate those into parks habitat. And that also allows you to tap into other sources of funding statewide at the watershed district. We should, you know, basically definitely be, they're going to love hearing this, but Minnehaha, you know, get those guys to pony up some money to help out. Because I think if we come up with some innovative strategies, that will be attractive to things like the watershed district and state funding sources as well.
So we have two examples already. So currently we're looking at a potential regional right here in the Grandview with the Grandview Green.
Right.
Can we do something where we could capture the water, use it for golf course irrigation, use it, make an amenity, just like you're talking about.
Right.
The other one is the Pennigan Park, Fred Richards.
Right.
So that was part of the master plan down there, was to increase the flood storage. But we're also partnering with the Watershed District and Bloomington right now, saying this is a multi-agency problem. Let's get together and see what can be done regionally.
And I think Arden Park is another that has more of a clean water focus too. So thank you for your comments. And then also, I think what this strategy, what this table does is that it expands our strategies, you know, beyond just this conventional, you know, modify the flood, move the water around, build, you know, pipe it here, there, all that. And I think it kind of incorporates more, widens what we would consider if they're on the table.
Good, thanks.
Maybe before we go into you, Jimmy, I just had a couple comments too. So I'm trying to remember some of the questions or comments. So the impervious coverage, I know that I always keep asking Carrie that when that comes up, when we get site plans and such, because it just seems like that's kind of a no-brainer. But so when you talk about that flooding, you know, the increased flooding, is it due to the increased precipitation that we're seeing, or is it also because of the increase? Is it kind of the combo?
Yeah, it's the combo, and we haven't done any work to kind of parse out what it's attributed to. It's probably going to be really variable across the city, but it's absolutely both of those things. So that increased precipitation frequency and impervious trend. And then in the modeling, we updated our assumptions about imperviousness because we did a quick analysis, and if it's not an appendix, it will be on our website, on our Water Resources Library anyway, where we look at, you know, we're assuming what is impervious in a certain neighborhood, and then we did some analysis to confirm those assumptions and update them where they needed to be updated. So it's both of those things together.
Right. And so have we investigated whether or not that would help the solution if we did throughout zoning implement that, and or is that?
Well, I think Carrie can speak to other communities on what, if they have that limit or not. Right now we don't. So people, I mean, we all know lots that are heavily paved and you know, all that. So it's definitely going to help if we set a limit. The question is, what should be the limit? Because look at some of these small lots in Country Club. What they can do is they're going to be severely changed if we put a number on it. So that's the trade-off. How do we police that redevelopment in the future? If we also set a number where one person got to do 80%, now we're saying it's 50% or whatever that number is.
Well, I mean, I think you
It's
have
tough,
a case, you've got a good case that you can make. And I think, you know, Sheila mentioned too, maybe there's a way that you could increase it if you know, add to a fund or something like that. So the acquisition one, is that typically done in other cities where you would?
We've seen it done. It's not again, now you're taking a property, off the tax rolls? What do you, now the neighbors, do you make a pond there? Do some people don't want ponds? What do you do with that parcel afterwards?
I think a particular challenge in Edina versus some other communities that are further outstate, I know Mankato, there were some severe flooding issues, and so they had gone out and they had acquired entire blocks, and you can, and they're parks now, and you can see like there's still boulevard trees in this park.
Yeah.
But the value of the property in those spaces, it was much more, the cost-benefit ratio really worked out to acquire those properties. They were 80 years old, Ma and Pa had been there forever, they're ready to move out, the house needed a lot of work. When you look at Edina, there are some, in some of our most floody areas, there's some really valuable properties there, so then it makes it kind of a more complicated decision.
Yeah, when you got a roughly, you know, $2 to $3 million you're generating with the stormwater utility, and you buy one $500,000 lot house, it just makes it challenging.
There's some state funding that kind of, it can be used to offset that, and we've asked the DNR, the state DNR, if some properties in Edina might even be eligible for that, and the cost-benefit ratio just doesn't really pan out in our community.
All right. And I guess just my final comment too about the investment, that $4,000. Does that place the city with liability if we're making recommendations, or?
We're not making recommendations. So we're just partnering up a resident with an engineer.
Even
not the city
that?
engineer, not any of our folks, somebody, and they're looking at a private drainage issue that they would have to get permitted through our city. So we would still review the standards to make sure that they're not pushing harm on neighbors or anything. So
Okay, so no
it
liability.
wouldn't be it's just like if you, like Steve when he built his rain garden in the backyard,
Right.
something like that.
But it seems like we could, maybe we already have this on our website, but could you just list, you know, here's some contacts, or here's some,
We
you
could.
know,
I think we
useful.
wanted I mean, we haven't got it all defined, but we kind of wanted to define it where we maybe go out for RFP and just have one, probably a smaller firm so the costs are down, but one firm we're comfortable with that could design this stuff, and just have them do these instead of having 20 different firms doing all the day and have to learn our standards and everything.
Yeah, and I think the value in that too is we want to, just as city staff is looking holistically at this comprehensive problem, we want someone who's designing a solution for a drainage problem not to just look at that lot, but to look at the
Got it.
neighborhood. And this is a way to kind of make sure that our model is available and that we have a competent consultant that's considering those same things that we are.
So kind of educate them to our issue and then have them look at these small
Okay.
things.
All right, thank you.
So I already spoke, but I also wanted to let you know, I thought your presentation was really great. I learned a lot. And I don't have, you know, very much to say on your particular questions, but one of the things that, or at least not yet, but one of the things that occurs to me is because you're changing the flood zone, right? How does FEMA get involved? And are these properties then eligible for flooding insurance that they wouldn't be otherwise? And I don't have any experience with FEMA, but my understanding is it's basically subsidized insurance. And while I think the conservation and the education and the water gardens would be preferable, I'm wondering if you're addressing that and what kind of option that provides.
Yeah, and this is separate from the FEMA flood issue. In 2016, if you remember, we were here in November.
I wasn't here,
2016.
sorry.
Okay. And we had brought kind of these new FEMA floodplain maps and the ordinance that went along with it that we are required to have if we want to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, which makes that insurance available to people that live here in the city of Edina. So these local flood issues are kind of, they have separate standards that we're going to apply separate.
So the FEMA ones are typically along the creeks. That's where the FEMA flood, it's the 100-year, 500-year floodways. So it's typically on the creeks, and they have guidelines for development within them. We're asking, should we use those same standards citywide on some of these local issues that don't trigger the FEMA thing? That's where most of the feedback, and that's where that one lot we looked at 44th and Grimes is completely covered. So if we use our same standards from FEMA, you'd have to build a house on stilts or not build at all, or because the whole thing was covered. So that's why we could codify that 2 foot, but we need some flexibility to have judgment on, do we allow them in there anyway? And they're going to assume that risk. We educate them, we know the issue, and they're going to assume the risk. So that's kind of the question of using the FEMA standards on a local level.
And then the other comment, you had a question about flood insurance, and if it's a FEMA flood area and that homeowner has a mortgage, they'll be required to carry flood insurance. If it's a local flood issue, there's no requirement there unless their mortgage broker on their own or insurance broker requires it. But certainly, it's a common myth that people can't be eligible for flood insurance, but certainly everybody is in whatever situation. We had someone call who lived in the second floor of an apartment and asked if they should continue their flood insurance policy. We said, you probably don't have to, but you certainly can. Anyone can buy flood insurance.
But it's interesting in Edina, if you don't have a mortgage, you don't need it. So we know folks that are in it down by the creek and they don't have a mortgage and they choose not to have insurance.
Part of it is that, people should be able to make their own choices. But I think the city's job is to make sure they're educated.
Well, and FEMA
Right?
says you
And
have to protect property.
Yeah.
So FEMA, it's definitely set. It's the local side that we're looking for input.
Right. Yeah, and there is a public burden to people building in risky areas too. So sandbagging and emergency services. So there still is a public cost to being in a risky area. But where do you draw the line? That's a question for
it's a tough question.
Our commissioners and council to help guide us on.
Commissioner Nemiroff, did you have comments?
Yeah, I have comments, questions, some dealing with your questions, some, I think, dealing with other things. So forgive me if I wander a little. First of all, just kind of a gating question, comment. The Metropolitan Council has now identified Edina as an urban environment. How does that impact how you're addressing some of these issues?
From a clean water standpoint, I've been calling Edina urban for a long time. As far as the pollutants that we see and the challenges that we're facing from a clean water standpoint and even from a flooding one, it's very typical of other urban spaces. It's not quite as challenging as places like Minneapolis where they have combined sewer overflows and things like that. So we are a little bit better off in some of those instances. But as far as the urbanness of the city, I think it's just imperviousness that's really driving our model. I don't know that the designation from that council is going to really change.
I also, I think that's a classification of the present, but it also and it sounds like you're considering it in terms of how the present, what's happening in the present, but I think we also need to think about what that could mean for the future. Because I think when the Met Council says you're urban, it implies we see these changes happening to your city in the next 10, 20, 30 years, some of them having to do with, many of them dealing with things that could affect the environment. For example, an urban environment, an environment that's moving from suburban to urban, in my mind, naturally would then increase its impervious lot coverage. And if that's how we're projected, maybe we want to get ahead. Maybe we really, your question about limitation, we really do want to get ahead of it till we're staring at it and go, oh my, we just became an urban environment, not just in terms of our pollutants, but in terms of our loss of greenery. And maybe we do want to address that now before it happens. I mean, it's like Palo Alto, California is a wonderful community, but if you are lucky enough to own a house there, your yard is a postage stamp. And I don't think we want that. But, the image you showed tonight of the remodeling between 2009 and 2015 on page 14 of your presentation, we are losing yards. We had you sat through the presentation earlier tonight, and the guy's like, "Oh, I like it," and somebody said, "Oh yeah, everybody's selling. They like their big lots, but people are getting smaller lots." And you had the presentation about one drop not solving the problem. But I think that's a great question. I would encourage us to probably think very hard about having an impervious lot coverage limit. Sheila's idea, perhaps, of, well, there's a fee that's imposed if you exceed that, maybe one way to fund the coverage issue. That actually is a reasonable thing to think about. Another thing I want to talk about related, just segueing from that, and I have several all over the place. When I grew up in a time and place when there were like two core values in my neighborhood. What was God and a lush lawn. And so that implied heavy water usage. We had a neighbor who was like the city, on the city fire commission, like the chair of the city fire commission. That house, they watered their lawn 2 or 3 times a day. And we was like, well, you're on the fire commission and they need water. We had droughts existed back when I grew up. And, but that, and so I didn't really see anything here about water usage. I do know in other communities that they are doing various things to deter water usage. It could be a naughty list that gets published in the paper. It could be a very progressive fee schedule. If you exceed a certain amount of money, that could be another way to fund.
We have that today. So we have a tiered water rate for the purchase of domestic water. With those 3-4 years of wet years, it's tough to see if the water use went down because of the tiers or because of the wet summers where people didn't have to irrigate. So we currently have tiers already in place.
Okay.
And then I'll just add a comment to that too. So the way that this is structured is watershed districts have watershed management plans. And in those plans, they dictate what member cities have to do and provide in their plans. So they kind of pass down what we need to include in our plan. And 9 Mile Creek Watershed District requires us to review our water conservation ordinance. And so we are, at least right now, planning to do that in 2018.
Well, that's great to hear.
And have the Energy and Environment Commission kind of provide some feedback on that too. So we're getting there.
Rambling. This is one comment I have that may not relate anywhere else, but a couple items on my notes here. Traffic. I know Chad, you deal with traffic a lot for other reasons, but can you tell me how the current traffic patterns, projected future patterns, how that could impact water control? Is it just back to the impervious, or is it, because I'm also thinking even if we don't add roads, it's just the volume of cars. What does that do to all the water issues you deal with?
I don't, unless Chad's got something to add, I don't see a clear one for flooding, and we're actually, narrowing streets as we go with our Living Streets plan. From a clean water perspective, there's certainly pollutants that come off of brake pads and things as cars are driving around. I don't know what the numbers are. Those typically aren't the greatest pollutants of concern in urban cities like Edina, so phosphorus, chloride, those tend to be kind of the big hitters. So I don't really know the answer to that question, but certainly with traffic and expectations for drivability in the wintertime, that certainly has a clean water impact, as the expectation for clear roads year-round. I can get to Target in 10 minutes on a summer day. I want to get there in 10 minutes after, when it's snowing on a winter day. That certainly has a clean water impact, but as far as otherwise the volume, I'm not sure there's any other.
I think it's that level of service, the snow plowing thing, because that's directly linked to clean water. So Edina is known for snow plowing and snow removal. Some of those operations go against clean water.
Well, Jessica, you know a lot of stuff. Maybe maybe you'll know even more a year from now. You've definitely, snow, salt, safety. That's a big issue.
And the fertilizing lawns, that's a big one that Jessica brought up.
I wanted to get to that, but with regard to snow and salt, maybe fertilizing and leaves. The region, the state loves to have bad press for the city of Edina. And one of the items that we got bad press for in the last year was Lake Cornelia. And to what is that preventable? Are there things we can put in our general plan that can prevent situations like that?
Good question. I was anticipating a Lake Cornelia question. So if we look at, and we kind of have some other stories to share about Lake Cornelia with some handouts that I could have brought today, but I didn't. I can share those with you guys after the fact. But essentially, if we look at Lake Cornelia and what, the question is, what do we expect out of Lake Cornelia? If we look at 1930s, we can see fields that are being hayed. We've heard stories about farms and cows that hang out in that space that are loading phosphorus all the time as they're, pooping around. And then we build up this sediment layer that's full of phosphorus, and then we have this legacy phosphorus effect, where even if we put in just clean water over the top of that sediment, there's a lot of potential for that sediment to leach phosphorus out into the water column for years. We don't know. We could do some sediment cores. They're doing that on some other lakes in, I think, Minnetonka right now. So as far as managing phosphorus in a water body that was really a wetland and really, really small, what we've done as the city of Edina develops and we get more roads and more malls and more impervious surface, the low areas are going to flood with water and form these ponds and lakes, and that's what Lake Cornelia is. And we have a lot of sources of phosphorus. Our 50s and 60s development strategy of piping everything to the lowest area also doesn't help. It's this direct conduit for pollutants, including phosphorus, to get to Lake Cornelia really fast. So Lake Cornelia is a really complicated system, relatively huge watershed. That's going to be a really tough one to solve. If we were to even prevent any new phosphorus from entering the system, we would still probably see phosphorus coming in the water column for some time. How long? I can't tell you that right now. That's a tough one. As far as like the harmful algae bloom part, it's really not as rare as it seems. But there's no harmful algae bloom if you don't measure it, right? We measured it. And so, because we thought that was the right thing to do, is to let people know what the actual risk is. So they're becoming more common statewide. It's not an issue that's unique to Edina, but it certainly is one that is alarming. And I know that the public's not comfortable with that. I know that staff and council aren't comfortable with that either. So
I remember when I was like 30-some years ago seeing terrible algae bloom in a lake south of Northfield, which isn't urban or, I mean, it happens a lot more. One thing you mentioned, and I am close to finishing my questions or comments. I have two to go. One is leaves. You mentioned leaves. Chad, Jessica, you both mentioned leaves. I know the Freshwater Institute has a lot of initiatives going regarding clean water, one of which dealing with leaves. And it seems, to keep that out of the systems, it seems like the city's doing something about that. Am I seeing that correctly?
So there's several things. The city has some street sweepers, and they can go through and collect that debris that gets into the curb. There's certainly space for more street sweeping, in my opinion. Then we also encourage residents to manage the leaves on their own properties. If it's on private property, which is maybe, 70% of the city of Edina, there's only so much that we can do. So we encourage residents to manage their own leaves. There's some street sweeping. There's some studies in Madison that says that was, at least in Madison, a really, really big contributor of phosphorus to their local water bodies. So I think there's some public-private things. And Commissioner Hamilton, you mentioned this participation by everyone, and I certainly echo that. And I think there's, you'll see pieces of that kind of in our plan too, is that it's a shared problem. And so there's some public and private.
I wonder if there's an education component too, in terms of raising public awareness of the importance of, for example, of keeping your leaves out of the street, and if simple education things about, well, what may have been a great idea to how to deal with your leaves in the 80s, 90s. This is the new understanding. Final, and this is more of a I'm sorry?
You can't rake your leaves into the curb. You can't. There's an ordinance in the city.
Okay, educate people, because people do. People and they don't clean up. If they go in the street, they're like, hey, it's off my property.
Yeah, and there's some regular, like, about town education that we do, and you're right, you can't dump your debris, your waste in the street, and that includes leaves and grass clippings and all that else. We have an illicit discharge detection and elimination program, and we've issued letters to folks who are throwing all their grass clippings on the street. We've sent letters to people who think that the creek is a really convenient way to get rid of leaves, free and easy. And then the other thing I just want to mention too, before I let you get back to your comments, is there's a program called Adopt a Drain, and it was piloted in St. Paul, and they're piloting it in, I think, Bloomington next. And we're part of Watershed Partners, this Clean Water Minnesota initiative, where it will eventually get rolled out to all metro cities. And that essentially is you sign up to say, this drain in front of my house, I'm going to own this, and I'm going to make sure that I keep it clean, that I prevent any leaves from getting in there. So we don't have it yet, but it's coming down the pipe.
It's like Adopt a Highway. Final, and that is with thinking about the $4,000 per property. One solution could be to do it as kind of a loan that gets paid back, say with property taxes, or it gets paid back as a lien against the house. It gets paid it when the property is sold at some kind of interest rate. There are other government programs that are handled that way. That could be a way of funding it also and recovering it.
Yeah, we'll come up with some options and talk to our city attorney on what we legally can and can't do. Great, thanks.
Thank you for a great presentation.
That's good. Ready, Jimmy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. Now I don't have as many because everyone said everything, right? I guess first, yeah, awesome presentation. Just very graphical. Told the story very well, so thank you. Maybe to echo Ian's naughty list, that's kind of funny. Yeah, I think in Edina, we're fortunate where we're not in a different situation where, flooding is a really huge ordeal and huge deal and maybe more frequent. And I think back when I was representing some of the analyses we did for some levees up in the Red River area, and we're at some very heated public meetings showing where the new levee's going, and people are chanting, dig it deeper, dig it deeper. And, luckily we don't have that kind of ignorance in our city, but I think there's still a lot of opportunity for education. And I think along with Commissioner Hamilton's point of, like, there are all these concerns, but if we could spin them into opportunities where people realize that, like, yeah, that is the same water. If you do like recreation, all this kind of stuff, you protecting certain things helps that part of your life, but then helps all these other all these other issues. With some of the complex problems that you listed out, yeah, they're a challenge, but I see in a lot of them, or even ones that come to us with someone redeveloping a property, or ones I see along the creek, those complex problems really require creative solutions, and oftentimes addressing one thing addresses one or two other components. Like, for instance, a rain garden, collecting your water, then also promoting infiltration. You're promoting clean water, but you're also slowing down drainage and the flooding along with it. I had ponding in my yard too, and I got a grant from the watershed district to do a rain garden, saved it. But I know that they are no longer doing that program because of the cost they get. So I really am a fan of green infrastructure, or, water management practices on the local private level. And now we at least know with your map of where these areas are. So I don't know if it's worth having that $4,000, some opportunity like that. I see maybe you have a high end and a low end. You get more if you're in this area, and maybe we as a city are more intentional with working with each of those property owners to just get them some of these opportunities that they could implement in their yard, or if it requires a regional approach to do that. But yeah, I'll send a list of specifics in an email. Is that what you guys would prefer?
That'd be great.
Sure, yeah. If you feel like you have more comments after today, certainly send me an email. It's listed on the staff report too, so you can get my email address and send me any comments that you have through the 27th. Yeah.
I guess we want to make sure whether it's a commission comment or a resident comment.
Sounds good.
I don't know how you want to handle comments coming afterwards, but.
I would like there to be a summary of the commission comments
Sure.
too. And are those questions on the website, or?
No, we can.
They are not, but
we can provide those.
Yeah, I can send those.
Or send
I can send
those to
those to
us.
Carrie, and he can
Okay.
get them to you.
So just a couple
keep going,
questions left. The from those maps with the flooding and maybe the issues that you know of, how much of that is from surface drainage versus just infiltration of, like, the natural groundwater? I mean, is that all from storm events, from runoff primarily?
right? This would be all precipitation. So
Okay,
it
so
wouldn't
all-
be any groundwater effects. There's some modeling where we, things like lakes and ponds where
Yeah.
that water is already existing at that groundwater level. Those things are considered as kind of already existing. But yeah, it's not going to be any groundwater impacts
Okay,
that are
good.
shown on the surface. It's all precipitation.
Yeah, because I mean, those are the low lying areas, so for any way that we can just delay the water from getting there, and usually when you delay it, you're either letting it evaporate or you're letting it infiltrate, and I think a fragmented approach, if each property owner is doing something different and we really push something on new development, since we're lucky enough to get a lot of it, that you could actually see some change. That last example, we had the variance for the house, the height. The thing I brought up, and I think you mentioned too, is their driveway was substantially larger, providing this impervious surface now right at the foot of the creek. So you're speeding up water to get into the creek or to the sewers. And then now it's going to be bringing off contaminants down there, and maybe the watershed district has buffering plans along the creek for new development, but we don't see how that goes or how it gets implemented. And I know from canoeing the creek, it's very fragmented with what people do, but there are ways that we could, as a city, just really encourage people to protect, those water bodies, whether it's a lake or a creek, to slow the water down, catch the, phosphorus, chlorides that are running off. So I'm about all of the stuff you're talking about and whatever we can do to help. But I think education is really key, because for me, it took me building a rain garden. I had Todd, who was a neighbor. He helped with supplying me beer late at night when I was working on it. But a lot of people came up, and now I have a sign there, and just talking about that, people didn't know about that as an opportunity or an option. And, if they have a wet area, it's just, but we luckily have the data of the properties now that are the problem ones. So I don't know if that $4,000 or if there's some other thing you could do to just kind of have a higher low to just really, tackle the ones that have the issue first and then work your way back or something.
One of the biggest impacts are where you see the issues. The biggest impacts, if you implement stuff, are at top of the hill.
Yeah.
Catch the water before it gets, by the time you're on the bottom, there's not a lot of opportunities down there anymore to do stuff. So
Yeah.
catch it upstream, up the road, wherever.
And so oftentimes it's the, people on the hill that don't know that they could help.
So how do you get those folks to participate?
I don't know, man. They're clueless. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I think everything has been said, but I'm going to send, actually, I think I'll email quite a bit. You're not kidding, comprehensive. So that was a lot of information. I actually did look at the 405-page draft, so I'm going to have some comments for you related to that. First, for the record, I just wanted to clarify this because it's brought up several times with our Planning Commission. Yes, Met Council does describe Edina as urban, but this is how they describe it, the explanation in Thrive 2040. Thrive identifies Edina with a community designation of urban. Urban communities experienced rapid development during the post-World War II era and exhibit the transition toward the development stage dominated by the influence of the automobile. Urban communities are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at an average density of at least 10 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. In addition, urban communities are expected to target opportunities for more intensive development near regional transit investments at densities and in a manner articulated in the 2040 Transportation Policy Plan. I point that out because we I think sometimes confuse suburban, urban, with the general term of suburb. I think Edina has and probably always will be seen as a suburb of Minneapolis. I also want to point out that Minneapolis designation is not urban, but urban intensive, urban center, as well as Richfield is known as urban center. St. Louis Park, urban center. Hopkins, urban center. Edina is lesser to a degree, designated as urban. Bloomington is urban. And only when you get to Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, and Wayzata are they still referred to as suburban. So my point is, for the reason of that classification in Met Council, it's trying to say that the boom really transpired after World War II. It was not like Minneapolis, having been a city starting from the 1800s or whatever, always been an urban city. So we need to keep that in mind when we're looking forward and using that as a term. I was pretty surprised by the level of flooding. So to me, as a planning commissioner, I'm quite shocked, because I think that when we get a development proposal in front of us, that we also get an engineering report. And most times, it seems, I think we're all centered on what will this do in terms of runoff or stormwater or impervious surfaces. One suggestion would be that maybe you'd want to have a section on that report that literally says A, B, or C, give it a grade. For imperviousness, our concerns are at the level C, meaning there's some issues here. We don't know for sure, but we would flag that for you. Some other things about development proposals is that maybe we would actually just go ahead and recommend that we want to have a criteria right now for amount of impervious. Right now we just look at surface area coverage or something like that, which only includes building structures, not things like patio decks, sidewalks, driveways, things like that. So that would be something I would support as a planning commissioner, and we could even decide that and make a recommendation to the city council. In regards to the $400, you know, it's so hard to answer that question out of a context of, for me, I would sort of want to know, well, what is the stormwater utility budget? You know, what is your budget for all these areas that deal with water resources? I know you're focusing more on just the, you know, you didn't talk about water supply or the infrastructure, but what is the big budget? Because it's so hard to prioritize, and actually you're talking about doing some meaningful strategy here and implementation if we can't implement it based on prioritization. I've noticed in the tables that you've included, and this report was done by Barr, correct? Or with the assistance of Barr, our consultant. It seems to me they could help prioritize some of these things. You know, everything sort of has that feeling that it's of equal importance, and I'm sure they are. But again, we're in that quandary. How do we prioritize it? And then we throw it up to the city council and we say, well, give us a budget. They come back and say, well, what's the priority? So I think maybe that might be something we would go back and say the consultant really has to help us prioritize some of these things, because in a few years it's probably going to be decided, even if we don't decide it.
Just a clarifying question, do you mean for like the flood issues or the clean water issues, or just all of them together?
Yep, all of it.
So every agency has different priorities. You know, every agency, just like you said, the definition of with the Met Council. So every community can set different things. Right now, ours is capital spending and put bigger pipes, more structures, catch the water.
Right.
So if the priority is to change that.
So, you know, I'm thinking of the Southdale area. When we see some of these 26-story buildings proposed, and we're told the impact on the infrastructure is negligible, it's hard to really get our heads around it. I think that we have to weigh in more clearly on the water side, the water resources. That's probably that, and traffic really has to be looked at it with a fine-tooth comb. And then beyond that, we as a planning commission really need to understand it. We may not have the time to read those reports, but we certainly could take a recommendation from engineering or the transportation commission. Does this match up with your goals on the stormwater infrastructure or the clean water portion of it? I certainly think that at that Southdale parcel could, and I think the plan is still being written, but why not propose something green there, a major green feature that is totally permeable for the future? We don't have control over that property, but firmly believe if it becomes part of a plan, developers take notice. It starts to break down some of the big portions of that property. People start to see where roads might go or a green space, and more often than not, parts and pieces of that start coming into play, even if it seems impossible to imagine that parcel with anything but the mall. So I think that really takes some leadership from the side of engineering. You guys hold the key to that. You're the keeper of this report. So push the consultants to help define a lot of that. And then I think as a planning commission, we could easily use and want that information from you guys as well, because we have to deliberate up here so many times on issues like that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have a question, but just briefly on this discussion of what it means for Edina to be urban. I visited that same Met Council website a while ago, and at least my interpretation of that was that although the definition of urban refers to post-World War II developments, the fact that Edina was only recently classified as urban just over a year ago, I think indicates that there's still pertinence to the idea that Edina today is materially and demographically different than it was 2 to 3 decades ago. And as a result, this urban status still means that there's like some sort of change in the way that Edina should be structured, just because that classification is quite recent, although the definition broadly refers to that. That's just my interpretation. That could be, of course, wrong. But moving on to my question, I'll just start by saying this presentation was very eye-opening. And I guess just for the sake of not wanting to miss out on any of your guys' expertise, are there any other policies that weren't addressed in the presentation or in discussion that you think would be helpful or effective in solving this problem?
I know one policy gap right now is how to manage landlocked basins. When does the city get involved, and when is it a private issue? And I think we're just kind of starting that conversation. We're going through the painful part where we're just hearing a lot of kind of turmoil about it. We haven't really drafted any policy yet. We're kind of waiting to get a little bit of direction from City Council on that particular issue. We're not proposing to include it in this comprehensive water resource management plan just because of the pace and the schedule that we have to be on to get it adopted before the local comprehensive plan. However, there's always the option to do a minor plan amendment if through this process, which will probably take some time to do some stakeholder engagement and policy drafting and reviewing and getting feedback, that we could always come back and do a minor amendment to the plan to incorporate it at a later time.
So in terms of like the impervious problem, I think I've heard of roads and hard surfaces that allow for infiltration. Have you looked into those at all?
We have. So we have one on Jay's Place. We implemented a couple years ago just south of 50th Street in the Yard Park neighborhood. Difficulty with pervious streets is if it's over our utilities, sewer, the sanitary sewer and the water. Now we're going to have water going past those pipes, and are we creating an issue with stormwater now getting adjacent to a water main pipe that may or may not have a leak in it, and now may affect the drinking water. The other thing is you got to keep those streets really clean to make sure it can continue to infiltrate through the streets. So you think of all the leaves and the grass clippings and stuff like that we've talked about, that gets in there. We have and recently purchased a different street sweeper, that really regenerative air sweeper that can get that debris out of there, but it's a little bit more maintenance. So if we put in a bunch of those streets, then we're taking maintenance away from other streets because we got to make sure we keep that operational. So it's the trade-offs between implementing and the maintenance side on anything we put in the ground.
Oh yeah, and then in terms of like the algae blooms, I think I've like heard of this program called like Omega, and I think California is like experimenting with using algae blooms to create fuels and oils. Like, have you looked into that at all?
I know in general that there's a lot of investigation into using algae as a biofuel. Mm-hmm. I don't know of like the harmful algae blooms, if that is part of it. I haven't heard of that program, but yeah, I think that's the next kind of frontier for energy is algae.
This follows Commissioner Jones' comment, actually, and I don't really, this is more of a comment, and I don't necessarily think you need to answer. But if someone were to ask you, what would be the 5 things that your 5 programs you recommend implementing? You know, I'm actually not actually being necessarily looking for your answer tonight, but wondering if you could answer that, and if that would be something that you would want to include in the comprehensive plan.
I would say no. We want 10, 12, 15. We want every tool in the toolbox because every situation is so different. We did an analysis of green streets in a neighborhood where we tested some of these already. And we said if we put every street with infiltration along the sides, is it going to solve the problem? We could have spent $1 million and it would be incremental. So that one, green streets didn't do anything for the problem. So that would be more of the, maybe we have to get it somewhere else or put underground storage tanks or go back to the every property needs a rain garden in the backyard. So we don't want to limit how many tools we have.
I'll give you a cheat answer, which is adaptive management, which includes all of those things and all of the stakeholders participating, public, private, every tool in the toolbox. So I guess adaptive management would be my one.
Well, you might want to think about working something like that, or maybe not an actual project, but a general policy or guideline or initiative, like a big picture. I can't remember what we used to call it. Probably something that's R-rated. I probably can't say it on this televised thing in the technology world, but just a big blank goal. If you could put that in the comp plan, maybe you should put that in a draft, and we can see what it looks like.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. I think what we're trying to get to is that clean water strategy, which sounds like it's something similar to what you're suggesting, and this hasn't been scoped out yet, but that might look like in these next 5 years, here's all the things that we could do. We're going to look at some options, and we're going to give you the dollar per pound of pollutant removal, and then we'll give you that impact that it will have on the downstream water body. We'll do all that work, and then we'll propose this a la carte list to City Council and say, how fast do you want to move? Do you want to do 10 of these 50 things next year? Do you want to do all, well, not next year, in the next 10 years? Do you want to do all 50? So I think we're getting there where we're really going to lay out all the possibilities and say, this is how we can make some progress. City Council, how fast do you want to move? What's the goal you want to meet? Do you want to meet the standard, the minimum standard? Do you want to exceed it? Do you want some lower site-specific standards? So I think we're moving that way, but this just kind of lays out the framework to do that next step. So what I see happening is our flood risk reduction strategy coming next in maybe 2018, and then the clean water strategy coming after that, maybe in 19 or 20. We'd have to set aside some CIP money in our next cycle to do that.
Cost-benefit analysis. We did that in the White Oaks. We presented, here's our base. If we do the storm water management like we typically do, here's what it costs, here's what we achieve. And then we gave 3 other options: up the tree trenches, big infiltration pipe, and impervious pavements. We had one cul-de-sac where it made sense to do the impervious. And the council picked 2 out of the 3, went above and beyond what we typically do, and that got implemented 2 years ago. So we're already doing some of that already. Because there's some big difference in cost benefit by doing certain things in certain places. Yep, strategies. Yep.
A neighborhood kind of thing.
Yep.
But more of a big vision.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. So I guess it would help if we could get the presentation emailed to us with the questions, and then we would respond. How do you want us to respond, Carrie? Directly back to Chad and Jessica with the email, or do you need to compile?
You could just respond to me, and then I can forward them on too.
Okay. And so just again for clarification, so this is going to be kind of the last time we see the draft, and the next time we see it is when it's part of the chapter in the comp plan, or?
So we are going to, once we receive all the comments through the 27th, staff will consider those comments, and then we'll come back with a kind of a finalized draft. We'll bring that to City Council and present that, and we'll describe any changes that we made and ask if they would approve the plan to be submitted for stakeholder review. So at that point, there will be an opportunity to see it again before it gets to stakeholder review. And then the next point would be when it bubbles up to that local comprehensive plan and gets into Chapter 8, there'd be another opportunity to comment on the components that rise to that Chapter 8 portion.
Okay, so we do have an opportunity at the Planning Commission itself at that
Couple
point.
more, yep.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you.
Just like to say no droplet left behind, right? Is that the goal?
Okay, so next we have correspondence and petitions. I don't believe we have any of those. Nope. And then going to the chair and member comments, so I'm going to look over at Steve. I think Steve has an announcement.
Yeah, thanks. My company is relocating me to California. So to run the conservation programs in California for my company, the Conservation Fund. So that's going to happen sometime early 2018. Yeah. So I definitely want to do as much as I can to keep moving forward with certainly with the Southdale work that we're doing as well as with the comp plan. But I will be stepping off of the Planning Commission soon, just because I need to start things going in California. But I just certainly want to take this opportunity to say how rewarding this is to be on this Planning Commission. Edina is really an incredible community, and we intend to keep our house here, so we will still, in one way or another, right, be a resident of Edina. So, yeah, it's hard to leave this place. What part of California? They're letting me go anywhere I want, but San Diego is my home. That's where I grew up. So there's a lot of forces pulling me back to San Diego. So it's probably going to be there. Yeah. Congratulations. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks. Not quite La Jolla, but San Diego. Yeah.
Well, thank you for all that you've done, and it makes us sad, but we're really happy. And
thanks. I appreciate that.
It's, well, anyway, but yay. So we get you through maybe one more Planning Commission.
Yeah.
Is that December 5th? Is that the next Planning Commission? 6th?
Yeah.
But there's a work session on the 5th?
The next city council meeting is December 5th. We have a planning, my computer died. Our next Planning Commission meeting is the 25th of this month? 29th.
29th. It is the 29th, okay.
And then we just have one meeting in December 13th.
Okay, so, okay. Well, try to make as many as you can.
Yes, I will. Thanks.
Okay, great. Anything else? Oh, what?
I want to recognize.
Congratulations.
Yeah, this dude over here.
Isn't that soon, or is that?
Yeah, there's one like at the end of this month, and then there's one in February. So. Yeah.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thanks.
Got some nice publicity on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I actually saw it in the paper like before you emailed that, so I was like, what the? Nice. I know him.
Can we get his jersey?
Yeah.
Hey, oh, sorry, what? It's just, do you have, okay, go for it.
70th and Cahill, we had 3 small area plan group meetings, and we are coming up on our first community meeting, which will be December 9th. I believe that's the correct night. And help me, there are 3 community meetings, and I thought, Susan will have to help me with the names, but I thought the first one was called Dream.
Well, our first meeting's Discovery. So that's December 9th. They're all on Saturdays, so we're hoping to catch as many people, families, people before their soccer games, whatever. And kids are welcome. Is Discovery, December 9th. And then we'll have a what we're calling a Dream Workshop Saturday, February 3rd, where actually some concepts and ideas will be pitched by the consultant. And about a month later, Saturday, March 3rd, another Saturday, probably only 2 hours this time in the morning, but will be actually the progress update. So by then, that should be the draft form of the small area plan. So look for that early March, and we're hoping to get that presented to the Planning Commission probably late March and early April, and signed off by the City Council, hopefully.
And just one last, we had a senior planner with the Three Rivers Park District who is responsible for the bike trail, which as you see it comes out of Hopkins, and a good part of it has now crossed 62 and also Highway 100 and then through Fred Richards. And there is a plan under discussion at the 70th and Cahill area. Currently the trail goes under 70th and spirals up, and they are looking at options to take that trail hopefully down Cahill, across 494 into the Bloomington Park system, Highland, and which takes that trail down to the Minnesota River. It's a, so I think the indication was that serious planning is undergoing, and hopefully by spring, summer of next year, they will be proposing some actual layouts. But it really sort of energized the group in our discussion, talking about this kind of connection and what it could mean for that area. Yeah, so that really got people charged, and you can kind of tell that they're walking away from these meetings talking about it, which the discussions are continuing out to the cars, and so I mean they're engaged, so that's good. Yeah, I think I picked the right group. Thank you.
We're meeting this Friday. So
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you.
Aye. Aye. Aye.